Good evening, everyone. I'm coming to you on what is really a sad day for everybody in the region after the various massacres that have been happening in Gaza for the last 7 days. Women and children being targeted by the Zionist entity. Of course, just like Al Qaeda in Syria, they don't engage with the resistance, the armed resistance factions on the ground. Instead, they collectively punish women and children, and particularly those the most vulnerable, those that can't escape, those that have nowhere to go, such as all of the 2.2 or 2.4 million prisoners inside the Gaza concentration camp. So tonight, I wanted to talk with one of my dearest friends and an absolutely passionate, compassionate, and incredibly well-informed journalist, Marwa Osman, who's joining me tonight from Lebanon. Marwa, thank you for coming on.
Habibti, it's a pleasure to be with you and to talk about these extraordinary times indeed. Having me and especially to discuss the current events at these extraordinary times. I mean, what have been happening for the past 10 days have been immense on so many levels, but last night was on its own like a bereavement, a grieving point, a burden. It was melting our hearts, and my minds couldn't fathom what I was watching on those short video clips that we were able to catch. Just imagine when there's no electricity and when there's no internet, what other clips that we are missing, what other footage that we are not seeing, what other calamities that are basically just missing. No one is covering. It breaks your heart, really.
Can you just go back to the beginning of this? I don't even want to call it a conflict because it's been a conflict for so many years now. And, you know, the Western media in the West like to divide it up into these kind of mini conflicts and then totally disappear the history of what is happening right now. So can you give us like a brief history of why this is happening, and particularly the events leading up directly to the Al-Aqsa flood operation by the resistance factions?
But we were going to have to go back more than 120 years, but it's good to remind people every now and then of how this started, because people seem to think that this is something happening just now, like just the 2021 Saif al-Quds, the Al-Quds sword, or the Al-Janin, for example, incursion. Or they don't really know about history because, one, they are not educated enough to learn about this kind of history. They don't have the textbooks, whether it is academic ones or political ones, that are allowed to be in their libraries to read, and they don't really get a firsthand experience of what's going on in East Asia because of the mainstream media. We can talk a lot about that later on, but it started in the late 1800s, basically after the civil wars that were taking place in our region. For example, Lebanon was facing several civil wars, but the most prominent ones were in 1860. And further on, the entire region was always in turmoil, but specifically Lebanon and Syria, because they were at that time under the Turkish mandate and then under the French mandate, meaning Turkish occupation, French occupation. But the late 1800s, certain conferences were being made in Europe to try and find, if you will, a second home, or another home for the Zionists that are residing in Europe because of multiple reasons. But basically, they were trying to find a place to relocate Zionists and make their own home. There were a lot of options for the Zionist movement at the time, but they settled on the Middle East, what the UK back then called the Middle East, and especially the area that was run by the British occupation, which is Palestine and parts of Lebanon, the southern parts of Lebanon and Palestine. Palestine and Jordan at that time. And obviously, they were also in control of northern Egypt. And they decided that Palestine, historic Palestine, and parts of Jordan and parts of Lebanon will become known as Israel. And Israel will have the chance over the years to take over and become Greater Israel, taking over all of Lebanon, all of Syria, part of Iraq, at some point even part of Turkey, and southward towards the Arabian Peninsula. So they were planning on starting with a small colony and then expanding the same way they did, for example, in Africa or when they reached the Americas. And they started bringing in the so-called immigrants, but they were in reality naming them as they are, colonial settlers, with bringing them in on ships to the shores of Palestine, Lebanon, and Egypt in the early 1900s. I mean, you have settlers that go back to the 1920s that actually had Palestinian passports, like none other than the war criminal Golda Meir. She's a Ukrainian born and raised,
Yeah.
and she moved to Palestine, and she was actually granted a Palestinian passport. She held a Palestinian nationality up until 1948 with the Nakba, which is known in the West as the Israeli Independence Day. I don't know what kind of who they independent from, no idea, but that's 1948, the day of Nakba, where the Israeli Zionist colonial entity was born. And it was born in the West, basically in the UK, with complete condonement, funding, arming, and basically pressure from Europeans and the UK in specific to move to Palestine. I mean, how can you be born with so much money and so much power and so much military capabilities? That doesn't make any sense. You have to be already an entity that's powerful enough to make this kind of environment for you in a completely new setting, which is what happened in Palestine. They brought the illegal colonial settlers along with the armaments that they need, along with armies, starting with the British Army, with other European armies, and they started their own occupation forces as well, which they call the IDF, we call the IOF, the Israeli occupation forces. But they started by getting mercenaries with the Haganah terrorists, and people can go and look up what the Haganah terrorists are and what they did. They even killed British nationalities, British citizens having the British nationality in Palestine because of their terrorist behavior and terrorist acts. But fast forward, when they landed from the early 1920s up until the late 50s and 60s, when they continued coming in, it was not a barren land. It was not a desert. It was not hills and mountains. It was inhabited by natives called the Palestinians, who had their constitution, who had their state. They had their own currency. They had their own constitution. They had their own flag. They had their own passports. They were a nation. And you can find it in history. I mean, we're not making this up. They decided to take over, to loot the land, to kick the people out. And you have scores of videos for people who don't know. You can find them, despite the fact that YouTube always does a severe form of censorship against the history, especially the documentaries that bring out evidence of massacres and collective punishment and genocide against the Palestinian people and the Jordanians and the Lebanese as well at that time, because they were very peaceful people. They weren't armed. They were majorly farmers working in open land that they owned or that they actually leased to work in. And the only weapon that they had was old rifles, old Turkish rifles from the First World War, when their men were taken deliberately and illegally by the Turkish occupation to fight. Some of them who returned, they came back with their guns. These were the only guns that they had. So if they tried to protect themselves and defend themselves, they were killed on the spot because what they were using was nothing except either tools that they farm with or really outdated Turkish weaponry. So they were kicked out. We have lots of massacres throughout the history of Palestine that names each village and each city that the Palestinians were kicked out from. Zionists would come, choose the house of their liking, and literally just kick the family out and take it and say, "This is our home now." And as much of as ridiculously how it sounds very ridiculous, but this is how it happened. They kicked the people out and they killed whoever said no. And at some point, they even stole Palestinian babies from their families. A lot of families had infants or toddlers. Their babies were stolen and given to Israeli families who wanted to create a family unit, but mainly either they are too old or they cannot have children, or they found it to be faster, like we're a family living here, so that let's just steal that child. We're stealing already the property, why not the children? And massacre upon massacre happened. And the most important one is the Deir Yassin massacre, because it took a lot of lives, and it is documented, and there's footage and both video and photos of the massacre. Now fast forward to the 50s and 60s, when there was a war started happening between this entity and Syria and Egypt, when Egypt was still a vigorous Arabian power. With the also help of Syria, they coordinated several attempts to try and eliminate the occupation, or at least defend the Palestinians. But sadly, at one point, the Naksa happened in 1967, after actually the October 1979. I think it's 1973, the October War that
Yes, the
happened,
Yom
and the
Kippur
Naksa
War, as
happened.
they call it.
Yes. So it was supposed to have a big, if you will, seismic action, tectonic action underneath the feet of the Zionists, but it ended up being some sort of a failure after certain Arab traitors gave out information to the Zionists, and the Zionists ended up bombing most of the Egyptian army fleet, whether it was the marching brigades or the Air Force. So that brought that operation to a complete halt, to a stop. And then we know that the history of Sadat coming and going to Al-Quds and the Camp David Accord and whatnot. But during those years, as the years were passing, this does not mean that the Palestinians were not resisting. They were trying to take their houses back. They were trying to take their land back. They were trying to relocate family, because they were like broken apart. Families, there are a lot of families who just lost touch with one another, because some of them were kicked out to the Jordanian land, some of them were kicked out to the southern Lebanese land, others were kicked down to Sinai and to Egypt. So they broke out families that used to live in one land. Hence why, for example, now in Gaza, you see a lot of people coming from 35 different 1948 territories or villages or towns, because they were kicked out in 1948 and they went downward. They went southern to Gaza and they relocated. So they are already displaced in Gaza. Only, I think it's only a matter of 30 or 40% of the people who live in Gaza are actually from Gaza, but the rest are actually living in camps and refugee camps since 1948 up until now. Now, what happened later on was the PLO was created in Damascus, and it was gaining momentum with the help of certain Arabian, not all Arabian regimes, but specifically Damascus, and they started some sort of a revolution and a renaissance in the Palestinian resistance against the Zionist entity, and it took full form in the early 70s up until the late 80s. Through those years, the Yasser Arafat and the PLO were relocated from Ramallah up to Beirut, hence why we saw the Israeli entity try to invade Lebanon to try and break the Palestinian resistance that was bringing youth and mobilizing Arab youth and even non-Arabs as well who wanted to see Palestine liberated would come to Beirut and join forces with the resistance. We saw the Beirut invasion of the Israeli invasion of Beirut in 1982, and then is where the Lebanese resistance was born. There was already a Lebanese resistance born with Sayyid Musa Sadr in the 60s, early 70s, called the Amal movement. But what really gained momentum was Hezbollah when it was created in 1982 against the Israeli entity, and real fight against the entity began, despite the fact that Amal movement had several resistance operations that were very, very successful, one of which is the Ahmad Asir happened in the city of Tyre, and it ended up killing more than 100 plus Israeli soldiers in one of their military bases that they occupied in South Lebanon. But when Hezbollah was created, they got help to begin with when they were launched by the Islamic Republic of Iran, because it came after 1979, the Islamic Revolution, and when Khomeini in Iran took over power of the government. The revolution was a success, and he ousted the Shah in 1979. The first thing that Imam Khomeini did was to kick out the Israelis and turn the Israeli embassy into a Palestinian embassy, and create the week of Ramadan. Each Ramadan, the last Friday of Ramadan would be Al-Quds Day, and he started planting the seed of the Palestine in Persia. And it came back to the Arabian region, and it touched several people, mainly in southern Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And the resistance started. Obviously, Israel was very aggressive against the resistance, but and it remained occupying as well as occupying Palestine, since 1948, occupying 10 years of Lebanon, the 40s up until 1982. Up until the year 2000, 18 years of direct Israeli occupation of land in Lebanon, until the Lebanese Islamic resistance was able to thwart their further attempts of occupation and kick them out of the Lebanese land. We still have just 2 or 3 villages that are under occupation, which is why you see today Hezbollah bombing these occupied territories. I'll tell you later on why and how this is happening. But at that point, the Palestinian resistance was becoming Palestinian resistance factions. Lots of factions, not only the PLO, we started having, other than the PLO, we started having the other than the Popular Front, other factions were being born, and each faction was being funded and helped by certain countries. For example, Iraq used to help certain factions, Libya used to help out Egypt, and obviously Iran, and some of the Gulf states, for example, like Kuwait, also used to give a lot of help, whether monetary help or otherwise, to the Palestinian resistance. But throughout the years, what was the resistance that was capable of forming a solid ground to basically deter the Israeli entity from continuous barbarism and aggression against the people, the native people of Palestine, was formed in Gaza after 2000, after the Israeli entity left Gaza due to the constant fighting. Gaza was under Israeli occupation, just as the West Bank is, but had the sea and the desert and Egypt to their side. What do I mean by that? They were able to get in weaponry to find back, whether from the eastern desert in Palestine, the Negev, or from the desert in Egypt. A lot of people would still help, or from the waters, from the sea. It turned out that it was the biggest help to the people of Gaza from Lebanon. How? No, we really don't want to know, because it's part of the secret of distance that made it very successful as we see it today. But the people of Gaza had those borders that helped them in creating this very steadfast and firm resistance, unlike the West Bank, which was cut into pieces over the years, and it was surrounded by hostile time from the east by Jordan, which basically is a puppet in the hands of the Zionist regime, and all around by occupation. So it is very hard for them to resist because it's very hard to have the tools to resist. But throughout the years, as Hezbollah was gaining experience and learning more Revolutionary Guard and creating a channel and network of resistance organizations across the Middle East, especially after the US invaded Iraq in 2003, which also created resistance factions in Iraq as well, which are now vital, very vital part of the axis of resistance. And also what happened in the 2006 war, where Hezbollah also came out victorious despite the carpet bombing of Beirut's southern Dahieh district. But still, the Israelis weren't able to the Hezbollah resistance missiles up until the last moment of the ceasefire. And moving on forward, what happened in Syria, and at the same time, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Hezbollah were gaining more interest in certain Palestinian factions that they find that are for training, for transferring knowledge to them, and making them capable to resist on their own. There was a couple of mistakes when the global war against Syria hit, and we at some point Hamas was actually hostile towards Syria and towards the axis of resistance for certain decisions that were taken, but at the moment not really part of the decision-making process of Hamas, if you know what I mean. But at that time, those people who are basically now still residing in Qatar, not both of them, one of them still took a hostile stance against Syria, but at the end of 2019, basically between 2018 and 2022, there was effective effort by Hezbollah, the resistance in Lebanon, to try and break the ice between Syria and Hamas again, because they knew that by ridding Syria from terrorism, point towards Palestine, because this is what the main reason for all the havoc in the region is coming from Israel, and from its back, the West, Europe, UK, and the US. So they knew the wise people leading the axis of resistance in West Asia were very well sure. They were adamant on bringing back peace to the axis of resistance, to be focused on the real enemy of the region, the real enemy of the Syria. It's not Hamas. It's not even if we can come to a point and even say that the Syrians who are part of ISIS and Nusra are not really the enemy. They're just pawns in the enemy. And I'm pretty sure that when Syria hopefully success gets rid of terrorism, I'm pretty sure that the Syrian government will give its hand to the Syrian people, even those who were part of Nusra and Daesh, to try to rebuild the country. Because at the end of the day, these are Syrians, and when the West and certain Persian Gulf Arab states get their hand off of Syria, it would be much easier to rebuild and see a reconciliation among the Syrian people. But when that started to become a norm, when normalization of ties, if you will, between Hamas and Syria began again, and we started seeing this again in Damascus and issuing state, for example, every Zionist anti-bombs Israel, we started seeing better performance for Hamas, which was evident, and not only for Hamas, for the Islamic Jihad as well. And we also started to see a new wave of young resistance in the West Bank. We've seen for 3 years an escalation in resistance operations in the occupied West Bank by young people who are no older than 18 or 20 years old, which means who never had to go through the Oslo Accord, or before that the massacres, or before that what was going on with their ancestors. But still, because the oppression that they were facing on a daily basis from the Israeli entity, they were fighting the same fight, but this time with more knowledge, with more expertise, with more transfer of knowledge from the axis of resistance. They were adamant on bringing back the compass towards Al-Aqsa. And if we move forward towards the late 2020s, we see that in 2021 we had the first major war between the Gaza and the Israeli entity, which was Saif al-Quds, the Sword of al-Quds. We saw, despite the fact that in 2008, 2012, and 2014, Gaza was bombarded into oblivion by the Zionist entity, which caused a lot of massacres and a lot of people passed away, thousands of people, but no one seems to remember them or talk about them, especially in the West. But in 2021, up until 2023, we saw an upward trajectory in the way that the Palestinian resistance is working. We even start an upward trajectory in the 1948 territories where Palestinians were starting to initiate what the West calls lone wolf attacks, but what they are actually resistance operations by Palestinians living in 48 territories, also in the West Bank and in Gaza. We also saw the Battle of the Unity of Battlefields by the Islamic Jihad, and we also saw Saif al-Quds too by Hamas. And then last year it was a bit of a low profile on Gaza, but a more high profile on Jenin and the West Bank, on Tulkarem and on where also the resistance showed steadfastness, but the Israeli entity committed also massacres in Jenin as well. Hey, what happened 10 days ago, 2023, October 7, 2023, will go to the most important dates in the Palestinian cause and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Was when we saw Palestinian resistance fighters basically reclaiming what's theirs, because the West says that they attacked. They are reclaiming their land after being, since 2005, besieged in the biggest open air prison on this planet. 2 million people living on a 350 square kilometers space. They cannot breathe. They are sanctioned. They are besieged. They cannot go more than 3 nautical miles. Sometimes the Israeli Navy fires at kids playing football on the beach. They don't care. The Rafah border crossing is in the hands of the Israelis, not the Egyptians, as the Egyptians would like us to know. The other 15 checkpoints between the occupied territories are all in the hands of the Zionist entity, and they only allow 15,000 Palestinians to pass through on a daily basis to try and find a job in the occupied territories in order for them to be able to eat. So it's basically a concentration camp. It's not even a viable city to be alive in. But the Israelis made sure that the people of Gaza always stay in need and in shortage of food, of medicine, of supplies, so they can control them, so they can make sure that they are subjected to the will of the Israeli entity, which is why October 7 was a huge surprise for both the friends of Palestine and the enemies of Palestine. I mean, how we saw the resistance work in a very professional way, and how they were taking milices, and how it basically surprised everyone, especially the Zionist entity, that it made it commit a lot of mistakes that we now have evidence of lies and of manufactured propaganda that we would have never thought that the Israelis would even go there, because it's obvious that they are lies. But at the same time, it shows you how weak this occupation entity is. Had they not had air power, just eliminate the air force inside of the Zionist occupation entity, and Palestine will be liberated, as we saw in less than 2 weeks. I mean, the Palestinian forces were able to take swaths of land large that they were able to nearly connect between Gaza and the southern part of the West Bank in Al Khalil. I mean, they were only 7 kilometers away of Al Khalil, and that happened in less than 36 hours. I mean, if you don't know the map, look at the map of Ukraine. And for the past 5 months, what the Ukrainian army has been trying to control over the fact they were not able to do so, the Palestinians were able to take in 36 hours.
Yeah.
Imagine.
That's
Imagine.
something, yeah, I mean, it is quite extraordinary. And I think that's something I just want to touch on, because
Yeah.
you know, people in the West, certain people in the West, I mean, I certainly didn't subscribe to any of these theories. One, of course, is that Israel created Hamas and that therefore Hamas must be working with Israel to create some kind of 9/11 event that's going to escalate the conflict in the region, etc. So that's number one. And you touched on that, the complexity. I guess, first of all, I want to touch on the complexity of what the actual resistance is and what those resistance factions consist of. Because for me, even when I was in Gaza and I met with some of the armed resistance members, whether it was Qassam brigades or any
Al-Quds
of the
brigades,
others, yeah. Hamas political wing was in many ways separate to Qassam, to the military brigades. And actually, from what I understand, the military brigades maintained the resistance ethos and actually challenged members of the political wing, because there was even division, as you touched on, amongst the political wing.
Yeah.
And there are even rumors that some of the more steadfast members of Hamas were assassinated by the Zionists during the raid of the Mavi Marmara back in 2007? Nine, sorry.
2009, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, people tend to get caught up in something which has an element of fact and evidence attached to it, but then not develop it through the evolution that the movement has gone through, as you mentioned, in the last 2 years, and the normalization with Syria in particular. Syria, of course, suffered at the hands of Hamas and the various Muslim Brotherhood factions that were weaponized by the West against Syria, not only recently, but back in the late 70s and the 80s. And to just explain to people, you know, and also the framing of the war as Hamas against Israel, which for me just demonstrates that the West is using this understanding of Hamas against the resistance. Because in the past, even in 2021, they didn't describe it as Hamas against Israel. They described it as the Palestinian factions against Israel. Suddenly it becomes Hamas, right? So I
Because
want
even
to
now because
sorry.
even right now the Palestinian factions are actually bombarding different factions. They are sending in missiles and rockets after every airstrike that the Israeli entity does against the people of Gaza. The Islamic Jihad, Al-Quds brigades, the Izzuddin Qassam brigades, the Abu Ali brigades. There are many brigades, and all of them have weapons. And of course, it differs in quality and quantity. But the most powerful of which are the Qassam brigades and the Al-Quds brigades of the Islamic Jihad. But the Islamic Jihad during the Unity of Battlefields operation, they lost at least 7 leadership, 7 commanders, because of the Israeli intelligence that followed them to their houses. And if you remember with me, they were killing them with helicopters in their own houses. Like one of them was on the 7th floor or the 6th floor, and they killed him with his wife and his 2 babies. I mean, it was a war crime, but this is what Israel was doing. And also Hamas and Flotilla, which was in 2010, not 2009. I just double checked now. May 31, 2010. But as you said, even then they assassinated a lot of the leadership of Hamas. But the issue is from 2018 up until today, most of the factions that are found in Gaza have been coordinating with Hezbollah and the axis of resistance, which means not only with Hezbollah but with other axes of resistance, and not only in the Levant, even in Yemen. I mean, this connection is really very important for people to understand, because when we see Ansarullah threatening in Yemen, some people might laugh, but they forget that Ansarullah have missiles that have a 2,500 kilometer range, and they don't even need to use that. They don't need to literally send rockets or missiles, ballistic missiles towards the Israeli occupation. They can just take care of the Red Sea and eliminate any kind of security threat that comes from the Red Sea. That's very, very important, and people don't really realize this issues. Just as it is how important it is, for example, for today, earlier this morning, that we see that the Iraqi Hashd al-Shabi, no particular faction actually took responsibility of the issue, but they sent in bomber drones toward the Ain al-Assad base where the American occupation resides. So we're talking about different factions all across the West Asian part of the world, where they are directly coordinating with one another, which is why we saw how the quality of the operations since 2020 up until today have improved immensely in Gaza, as well as in the West Bank, but specifically in Gaza. When we talk about why now they are making it a Hamas versus Israel issue, because they want to make sure that in the so-called international community, it is immediately given a green light for Israel, because Hamas is considered the military wing of Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by the so-called developed West, the above us subhumans right here, the elite of our planet. They consider Hamas to be terrorists. I don't know why they consider them to be terrorists and not, for example, the IOF being the terrorist ones, since they are looting the land, they are killing the people, they are coming in the skies and bombing. But if you say no and lift your head, just as they considered Nelson Mandela and the ANC terrorists, they now consider Hamas, Hezbollah, the Hashd al-Shabi, etc., terrorists. We're not going to go into the ideology of this, but I think it's more of a media war when they keep saying Hamas versus Israel. But on the ground, the Israeli entity and the Americans as well, they know that they are fighting with at least 4 to 5 different factions in Gaza. And it is very, very important, because it means that these factions, despite the fact that they have a joint control manage when they have a battle, they manage the situation together, but at the end of the day, each of them have their own commanding officer and their own command, and they are separate entities, but work towards a certain one goal. And we saw that after October 7, because one of the most vital facts that actually happened on Monday night. Saturday, October 7 was the beginning of the big Al-Aqsa flood. On October 9, on Monday, October 9 at night, the Hamas, the Izz al-Qassam brigades were able to change the forces. They were able to bring in the men who were engaging for 3 days and just give out a different shift of men. The second shift of men that went into the Gaza enclave, which, by the way, up until this moment has not been under the control of the Israeli entity so far. They're still fighting, but the media is not showing you. There are still resistance factions from Gaza who are in the Gaza enclave, and Israel is not able to control the area yet. All these 15 checkpoints that were bombarded and opened, where the walls were broken down and the barbed wires were cut, they're still cut, and they are still not able to take control of that land. The Israeli entity, especially the ground forces that are supposedly getting ready for a ground invasion, they are residing in one specific area that is 50 kilometers away from the border with Gaza, which is very, very far away, to be honest
I
with
want to
you.
talk about the ground invasion, but anyway, carry on for the moment on this.
Yeah, but what they don't understand, what they don't understand is that the Israeli entity, I'm seeing the mainstream media here when they talk about a Hamas versus Israel war, they don't understand that it is different, and even the Israelis see it in a different way, because it's not only Hamas that's fighting, and the evidence was with the rockets that are being fired, especially to Ashdod and to certain Gaza enclave illegal colonial settlements by the Islamic Jihad and by the Abu Ali as well forces. So, or the Abu Ali brigades. So it is more complicated than what the West is trying to portray. And it doesn't really matter at this point because they're not in control. Even if they want to try and control the narrative, at the end of the day, if they don't control the ground, the narrative will not stay up all that much. It will fall, it will collapse. I mean, if you want to say that, for example, I'll give you an example. If you want to say that, okay, Hamas killed and burned 40 Israeli babies, no
Beheaded,
evidence
they claim.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
Excuse me? And
They claim
beheaded, yeah,
beheaded,
beheaded.
yes.
Yeah, beheaded. 40 Israeli babies. There's no evidence. We saw footage of everything. Some footage a bit harsh to see, but they were actually not by the Hamas resistance factions, nor by the brigades. They were by certain gang members who were trying to take advantage of the situation. But let's not get into that because it'll be a bit complicated to understand. But there's no evidence of that. Even the Israeli government itself would not deny nor approve of that narrative. They wouldn't say it happened. They wouldn't say it didn't happen. Would you, for a moment, Vanessa, believe that if the Israeli entity had proof about this, they would remain silent?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. And the fact is that obviously Western media put the story out almost immediately based on the original story came from, anyway, a Zionist reporter. I can't remember his name right now. But then it was pretty much every story that was put out in the first 24 hours or so was retracted, even by the White House after Biden claimed that he had seen photos of the 40 beheaded babies. Even the White House had to kind of, mitigate the damage after that. So it became, and I think that leads into the other question that I wanted to ask, which quite a few experts are putting out this idea that there's no way on earth that the Israeli surveillance systems could have been bypassed, that Gaza is probably the most surveilled area of land in the world today, and that it was impossible for them to break through the Israeli intelligence defenses and military intelligence defenses. Now, from my perspective, I always remember the words of Sayyid Nasrallah, which is that, Israel is weak as a spider's web. And I think we've been seeing that with the various resistance faction operations, as you said, in the occupied territories, but also in previous attacks from inside Gaza where the Iron Dome has failed. Even there have been probing, as we know, by both Syria and Hezbollah with drones to see basically, how far into Israeli territory they can get before being detected. And we know that the Israelis were caught out in the last 2 years. Both Israel and Hezbollah, Syria and Hezbollah have carried out these kind of operations, right? Literally to probe the defenses. So we already knew regionally that Israel was far weaker than its propaganda.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Remember how 2006 war began?
Yes. But
how did it kick? Well, in 2006, the skirmishes that we are hearing right now between Lebanon and occupied Palestine, between the Israeli occupation forces and Hezbollah. Right now, for example, today it is really immense. Today, the entire border is on fire. And I think this week is going to be decisive as to whether or not Hezbollah will enter the war. But that's not what we are talking about here. In 2006, there were still some skirmishes between on the border between Hezbollah and the Israeli entity, and targeting a Merkava from here, the Israelis killing or trying to kill soldiers from there. It was like very minor. And apparently it was some sort of an operation to divert the attention of the Zionists of one of the biggest operations that the Zionists have ever been put under, which was the kidnapping of soldiers from within Palestinian territories in Khalat Werde, between Khalat Werde and the Palestinian occupied territories, in the middle of the border, because you have, for example, Naqura, you have Alma al-Sha'ab and Ait al-Sha'ab in the middle, and then at the very eastern border you have Khiyam, and which is on the border with Golan and Mutullah, and then you have on the border between Naqura and Nahariya settlement, and between Ait al-Sha'ab and I don't want to say the wrong name of the settlement, but it's like in the middle of the border between Lebanon and in the middle of the map. So there's where what happened, where the operation happened. Hezbollah was able to take captive two Israeli soldiers, and the goal behind this operation was to enter. First of all, we all watched on years on. We watched the video how the Hezbollah fighters were able to just cut the barbed wire, go into occupied Palestine, engage in fire, get those two soldiers, put them in a 4x4 vehicle, and then just disappear. And the goal from that war was to swap these two soldiers with all the remaining Lebanese detainees inside of occupied Palestine. And that's how the 2006 war kick-started. But the issue is that according later on, in the Israeli entity, no, because after every war there's a Q&A that happens, a judicial Q&A that happens inside of Israel. And later on we knew, after a certain files were declassified, that the Israeli entity were actually planning on a full-scale war against Hezbollah 2 months after the July war happened. So basically what Hezbollah did by kidnapping those two soldiers was decide himself the date of that war, when. So back then, 2006, and Hezbollah, with the very medium, I don't want to say low, but medium or humble capabilities that it had, it was able to bypass the intelligence that they think that can be passed, but it happened. So why is it too hard to imagine right now in 2023, with all the capabilities that the Palestinian resistance has and have learned from past experiences in other factions of the axis of resistance, that they are fully capable of doing this? I mean, didn't we watch Vanessa, this past summer, at the beginning of summer, didn't we all together watch the military drill that Hezbollah did on the border in southern Lebanon, where we saw paragliders, we saw fighters handling bomber drones, we saw fighters with techniques and with logistical support, and also with weaponry that it was the first time ever that we see. I mean, if that was not a peek into what might other factions of resistance have abilities, if the Israelis didn't see that coming, but I'm sorry, they're dumb, they're stupid, but I'm pretty sure they did see that this was coming. But I mean, the secrecy and the way that it happened, because it happened directly during negotiations, not even after negotiations, because 2 months, for 2 to 3 months prior to the October 7 operation, Hamas was in mediation between with the Israelis, and the mediating parties were Egypt and Qatar, and they were mediating certain agreement to be broken to Hamas and Israel. And at the same time, the train of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel was going 500 kilometers per hour. It was like they were so close to do it, but then the operation happened and it stopped. But at that time, transferred to October 7, Hamas was engaged in indirect talks with the Israelis about the salaries, because after the Saif al-Quds, Qatar would send $30 million to Hamas every month for salaries and for certain logistical stuff, because they're both Muslim Brotherhood and they were supposedly dibs on and tabs on them, and paying them money to secure the security of Israel. This is what the world and even us at certain point were saying about Hamas. I myself was saying that. I was saying that Hamas was taking money from Qatar to just stay silent and not engage with the Israelis, because this is how we saw it and this is how it was on the ground. But they were in talks to say that, well, after Saif al-Quds 2021, Israel decided that's not going to allow the Qataris anymore to pay directly pay Hamas. So they decided that if Qatar wants to send money to the people of Gaza, because Qatar was sending $30 million a month with $100 fund for each family in Gaza, and the rest would be salaries for the Hamas government. So they decided that this money has to go through the UN, and any form go through the Egyptian Rafah border, where Egypt actually manages the situation and controls what gets in and what not. And there were 15,000 Palestinians in Gaza allowed to have passes to enter the occupied territories for work, because Gaza is small and it's a concentration camp that occupies 2 million people, so people need to have an income at the end of the day. And Hamas was engaging in these indirect talks to try and fix the situation, and to try to, especially the economic situation in Gaza, and to try to increase the number of passes for Palestinians to 30,000, but Israel wouldn't allow it, that from now up on 10 years, they would allow only 5,000 more, 20,000 only, and that they will see what they will have to do about visas for people in Gaza, especially those who need medical aid or those who want abroad. So they were still in the middle of negotiations, and we went into the Zionist holidays, the Jewish holidays, which is why most of the generals and soldiers that were taken captives by Hamas were in their homes, were in their houses. We saw them in their underwear being drugged, like bedrooms. You see that the highest, the command Nahal brigade in the Gaza envelope was taken. He's still hostage. We don't know if he died in the bombardment or not, but he's one of the most important captives in the hands of the resistance at the moment. So hence why it was during a holiday that the resistance decided that this is the perfect timing for this, because we cannot take it anymore. We are being suffocated. No one's listening to us. And if you go back to the articles written during that period, everyone was talking about the dire economic situation in Gaza, but no one was doing anything about it. So the Palestinians took it into their own hands to make the entire world listen. Now, it doesn't matter if you actually agree with how it happened or not. It's not up to you. You're not the one who is being suffocated, not the one who has been living under siege and under blockade and under aggressive bombardment campaign. Done. It's not your life, so you don't get to decide whether it's actually successful or not, and you don't get to decide whether it's violence or terrorism, because it's a matter of perspective. From the Palestinian side, it's a matter of distance. You see it as terrorism, we see it as resistance, and we don't care if you accept it or not. The amount of no F's by the resistance on that day, you can see it in the video of the paragliders. I mean, I cannot believe it up until now. People, I mean, the men were they from the sky. It's unbelievably epic. Yes, I'm very excited about it. And if you don't like it, just find a wall and bang your head to it, because a lot of people keep coming to my Twitter account and keep calling me names for being a supporter of the resistance. I'm happy because they are regaining their looted from them, retaking their land. I mean, it's theirs, and I'm happy for them. Why wouldn't I be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. I mean, there was a fantastic article written by a young Palestinian in Gaza, Heba Jamal, very soon after the operation started. And she basically said, Palestinians, it's not as if we want bloodshed, but I'm not going to condemn Hamas. I'm not going to condemn the resistance. Because if it means that this crushing oppression, this no life, Gazans don't have a life at all. I mean, people really don't, I understand that people just cannot comprehend what life is like in Gaza, because there's nowhere else like it in the world, right? Yeah. But, my question is, if the Jews in the concentration camps had been given weapons and had been given the support to rise up against their Nazi captors, are you going to call them terrorists if they kill Nazis, kill wives, children of the Nazis that were part of the complex that was keeping them inside the camps, gassing them, experimenting on them, detaining their children, raping their children, abusing their children, killing their children on a daily basis. I've lived in Gaza. You know, Israel carries out summary executions on an almost daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it doesn't execute, it shoots in ways that takes
Yeah,
away the lives of the people. You know how
exactly.
many people in Gaza have no legs, have no limbs, have
Yeah.
lost their limbs?
Well, the Grand
It's because
March of
they should
Return.
and
Yeah, go on, sorry.
yes, yes, definitely. And especially because also people don't really talk about the illegal and internationally banned weaponry that Israel uses
Yeah.
and uses as it pleases against the Palestinians, especially the explosive bullet. And indeed, they are targeting civilians, but they target them with bullets that go inside their bodies and then explode to make sure that they lose a limb.
Mm. Or even
I mean, how
the
barbaric is
tungsten,
that?
yeah, the tungsten bullets, which were also used in Syria, and actually the tungsten powder was used in the suicide attack on Al-Qa, the Christian town to the south of Lebanon. And the
Yeah,
tungsten weapons, basically, they enter the body, they explode, and they distribute this very, very, very fine particle powder into the body, which spreads through the organs and through the, you know, the various system inside the body, and
yeah.
develops septicemia, and the doctors can do nothing about it. They die because they can't operate, they can't remove it. Right. So
How
the
barbaric
way,
is that?
yeah,
And by the way, how did that get to that Al-Qaeda
yeah, exactly,
parties?
exactly. Very good question. And how did it get to Al Qaeda in East Aleppo? I mean, I've seen
Yeah,
terrorist weapons
yeah.
factories in the previously occupied areas of Damascus and Homs and East Aleppo, particularly. I saw terrorist weapons factories where there were whole heaps of this powder. So they were clearly putting it inside the missiles that they were launching into the civilian areas of West Aleppo.
Yeah.
But you know what I want to finally, because I know I've kept you quite a long time now. What I want
No.
finally to touch upon, you know, is this sort of false equivalence. I see a lot of people, for example, saying, "Oh, I don't want to take sides. You know, I just want peace. I want this all to end." Now, look, I can understand.
Yet they never say that. Yet they never say that about the Ukrainian conflict with
Exactly.
Russia.
Yeah. Well,
Never.
actually, they never said it about Syria, to be honest, you know. And so,
Or Iraq or Lebanon
yeah,
or Yemen.
exactly. And you know, I mean, you know that on the 5th of October, there was one of the worst massacres of the war against Syria, which was in Homs, when the terrorists sent
Yeah,
armed drones to bomb
the
uh,
military college.
yeah, a military college, but during a graduation ceremony, so that there were hundreds,
Yes,
thousands of
of
children,
people. Yeah.
families there, 80 killed, 240 injured. It wasn't even mentioned in the Western media. I mean, nothing, right? So I would really like you to talk about why this is. Like, why are people struggling with the idea that the resistance is an inalienable right for Palestinians, one, and why for 75 years have all those people that are now crying a river over the repercussions that Israeli settlers, the majority of whom are probably IDF reservists, and Israeli military are suffering as a result of this operation by the resistance to reclaim its land that was stolen from the Palestinian people 75 years ago. Why are they struggling to understand that there are no two sides in this conflict? Because it's a false equivalence between the Zionist entity and the Palestinians. It's only now that the Palestinians have organized themselves and the entire resistance axis has organized itself and unified itself, that it has the power and the weapons and the organization to rise up. So why is there not 100% solidarity behind that?
The same reason there was no solidarity for Iraq or for Algeria or for South Africa or for the African Americans in the US for their fight for freedom. It's the same reason always. It is the supremacy of the empire. It is the colonial mentality that countries with that are considered superpowers, that have superior military capabilities, that would always make sure that the narrative is we are the good people and whoever the other side is are the bad people, even if we have to go to them and kill them. The same way the terrorist sympathizer Ben Shapiro has been stating for the past 10 days. But it is for the same reason, Vanessa. I mean, what was the reason for not having full, automatic, and full support for the Iraqi people, especially after being bombarded with internationally banned weaponry, phosphorus, with at some point chemical weapons, with torture in Abu Ghraib and whatnot, prisons, and the same reason as well that even in the books of history, you see that Cuba is considered a terrorist enemy, but the United States of America, despite the fact that they were actually invading Cuba, are the freedom fighters. It's because the narrative is controlled by the people who have in the military capabilities and who have a superiority in the also in the narrative, which means in the basic communication process, in the to and forth communication process as to how the narrative is rewritten. It's exactly for the same narrative that we saw change at least 3 times since last night, since less than 24 hours ago, between about the hospital in the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital, because at the beginning the Israelis themselves said that they did actually the airstrike, and then later on it's now being said that no, it's Jihad. Well, I didn't know that the Islamic Jihad had American-made weaponry that was used in Afghanistan against the Taliban, and that a jet would drop it, and that thankfully people were actually taking footage. They were filming the process that can be seen. I think Hinkle actually was the one who a video from Lebo, and he retweeted it, and it shows specifically how it's actually an airstrike by a jet using a specific technique to get away from missiles that can be shot against it by releasing 3 flares and then releasing the airstrike. And it has nothing to do with the missiles that were being launched by the resistance. It doesn't even have that power. The resistance that the Islamic Jihad that was actually launching at that point in time, missiles against occupied territories, they don't have the firepower that is found in that specific bomb that is said to have been used by the Americans in Afghanistan. Even certain reports were speaking that it was American jets that released this this bomb. I'm trying to find the type of bomb because I wrote about it yesterday when it happened, but then again I was يعني overoccupied with the emotional stress that I had to go to, just like other people across the world were feeling at that time. I'm just trying to find, because the Washington Post was supposedly it says that the Wall Street Journal said that the bomb that was dropped on the Baptist Hospital was an American-made MK-84. And then I saw a couple of videos also online showing how the MK-84 is used in Afghanistan, and it's exactly the same firepower that was used against the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza. So the main reason for all of this is because they control the narrative, because they control how this story gets to the other side. I mean, remember at the beginning of the war on Syria, and it was all across every headline, gay girl of Damascus.
Yes.
Come to the Levant, no story whatsoever. Do you remember when you broke
Yes.
the story of the white helmets? It took more than 2 years to be reported in the Middle East in Arab media institutions. It's like we are on different planets. I mean, if you remember the blue pill headlines of Libya, not even one headline is found in the Middle East about that. It's a completely different narrative. Or, for
Mm.
example, the incubators, the story of the
Babies.
incubators in Kuwait. I bet you, if you do a research in Arabic, you will find very recent articles that are remnants of Western articles. It's a
Mm.
completely different narrative that is being given to the Western public because they control the narrative there. It's the
Yeah.
same thing, for example, in what happened in Lebanon 1996 or Lebanon 2006, because in 1996 we have the Qana massacre that killed more than 118 Lebanese civilians who were taking refuge in the UN headquarters in Qana in Sur entire South Lebanon. And the headlines in the West are that the Israelis had to bomb that UN headquarters because missiles were being thrown from there. How dare you lie? Even the UN itself issued an investigation and said that there were never any missiles or artillery shelling that were thrown from that in residentially inhabited area. But the lies are controlled. The narrative is controlled by the West, by the Western regime that control the mainstream media, but who always give crumbs, like breadcrumbs, to the Western public that would make them unrealistically believe that they are living in a democracy or in a free world. But in reality, they are living in a big cage, completely managed and يعني dictated by the Western regime completely. I mean, even not only at the level of the media, even at the level of the system of education. What are they
Mm.
learning? What kind of history books are they learning? What are they learning about? There
Yeah.
are a lot of issues that happen throughout history, specifically the wars that the United States of America managed and controlled all over the world that American children don't get to learn about in their textbooks in school. Very, very few of them who decide to go into history majors when they hit college years do actually get hit with reality. But at that time they are now brainwashed and they are now robots who are controlled by the regimes in the West, that they cannot even dare to overstep and question the narrative and question the real reasons behind these constant wars created by the West. It's as simple as possible, controlling the narrative by controlling the minds of the people. But it's always a sword with two very harsh ends, because at the end of the day we are using social media platforms in this day and age of social media, and we are still being able to get our narrative out despite the fact that it gets censored and we get shut down in many areas. But we always try and find a way, and I think that this time, especially in the 2023 Al-Aqsa flood operation, I think we actually have a small victory as alternative media, because we were able to debunk many of the lies that the Zionist entity and its Western friends were trying to portray, and we got them to apologize. For example, like the CNN operative, I call her the CIA operative, not the CNN reporter, but the CNN reporter who openly apologized for adopting that story without having any viable source to back it up with.
Mm.
And I think these small victories are very important in this day and age, because it is mobilizing millions of people on the West to see the truth. And we are touching that. And we saw that with the thousands of people who took to the streets, specifically in countries that decided to make it illegal to fly the Palestinian flag, or make it illegal to even march and say from the river to the sea. You're not allowed in the UK to say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. 2 years in prison. In France, you're not allowed to support the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian cause and fly a Palestinian flag, or you will years. And yet thousands of people flocked the streets angry about the massacres committed by Israeli entity and condoned and supported by the West, which means that we are actively seeing a renaissance, a revolution movement that, yes, it's taking a lot of time, but it's happening. And I'm very, very happy to see it. It gives me hope that our struggle is being highlighted in the West, whether they like it or not. But the only reason, Vanessa, it's being highlighted is because now we have the power to make them pay. Because if we didn't have the power to make them pay, no one would listen to us. And the evidence is 75 years of injustice in Palestine.
Yeah. One last thing, is there going to be a ground invasion? I mean, we've seen Israel, first of all, bad weather, then the fact that they have Hezbollah to deal with in the north.
Then hormones.
Yeah, then I can't even remember all of the, and then I think they put out a statement saying, well, we didn't really say there would be a ground invasion. I mean, you know, this is rather like the counteroffensive in Ukraine by Zelensky. It's rapidly becoming a little bit of
I mean, what do you think the options are here? You know, whatever Israel decides to do, it has received a full blow right in the face by the resistance. If they decide to invade, they will, the domino effect of open war will take the entire West Asian part of the world into World War III.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that China and Russia will just keep sitting and watching the US and the UK and other European entities bringing in their jet carriers, their war jet carriers into the Mediterranean. I'm pretty sure they're going to get their carriers as well. And at the same time, it would mean that Iran would be involved, Iraq would be involved, Lebanon, Syria, maybe parts of Jordan. We don't know what's happening in Jordan. Maybe parts, even Turkey. We might see people coming from all over the world to try and help out, because we did see Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan saying that they are ready to send in their military men to defend Palestine. This is revolutionary, Vanessa. But if you look at what the options that the Israelis have at the moment, what are they going to do? The only thing at the moment that they're doing is massacre upon massacre against the residents of Gaza. They can't invade because they're afraid to start a war, because Hezbollah and the Axis of Resistance said in the event that you invade, you're going to open care anymore. They can't stay put because they are not in control of the Gaza enclave at the moment, which basically would stretch the current situation for years and would make it easier for the Palestinian resistance to infiltrate into the 1948 territories. And this will be like hell breaking loose, but in slow motion against the Israeli entity. And they can't go into a ceasefire without at least winning somewhere. And it doesn't seem that they are going to be winning anywhere, because, I mean, when have you ever heard that the Palestinian resistance was able to inflict 2,000 deaths in less than a month? What month? Basically, 2,000 deaths in less than 10 days for the Israeli entity.
Yeah, we've never seen any equivalents. I mean, if you look back at previous wars, it's what, 3 Israelis killed and 2,000 plus civilians in Gaza massacred.
Yeah, in Gaza, for example, or for example, the 2006 war, it's like 120 something Israelis versus 5,000 in Lebanon, 5,000.
Yeah.
So it's like it cannot be even balanced. But now, I know we're talking about people dying here, but no liberation war comes without death. Look at what happened in Algeria. 1.5 million gave their lives for their independence from the French occupation. Look what happened in Syria, also for to get rid of the French occupation. I mean, with liberation comes a heavy price to be paid, and we know about this. And we, even at a family level, we have spoken and discussed this, that at the event of an open war, we have to be ready to indulge in grief, because we know at some point, some of us, or even one of us, will have to give their life for this process, because Lebanon is, I mean, it's a small country, and if an open war happens, and if carriers start missiles, Tomahawk missiles at Lebanon, they're going to be hitting residential areas. And we don't know if we're going to make it or not, but we have to be ready for this. And this is a very important and crucial discussion to have, especially when you have kids in the house. I mean, my kids were asking me what was going on in Khiyam on October 8th when the skirmishes started between the Egyptian and Hezbollah fighters, and I had to explain fully for them, even for the younger one who had many questions. And now when we are actively in preparation. We already prepared ourselves, Vanessa. We have our bags ready. We have our items ready. We have our important documents ready in the event that the war starts. And we have we're trying to secure a safe place for the kids. We're not running away. I just want to make sure that my kids are in a safe place because I have a job to do, and my husband has a job to do. He's a medic, and I am a media broadcaster. He has to be on full alert in case wounded and martyrs come to hospitals, and I have to be on full alert to notify the public, the international community, and the regional public of what is going on. So we know that we are going to be in different places mostly at all times. So we are getting ready for this. But the West needs to understand, especially Western public, that when we talk about this is our livelihood. This is our daily lives. Some people would say it's traumatic, but for us, it is the price that we are willing to pay for liberation. We are devastated, suffocated, burdened with the constant aggression to a point that, yes, we are considering to give our lives to see this process of liberation take place and happen.
Marwa, thank you so much for coming on and just opening up your heart as always, and showing people what life is really like under occupation, because particularly this generation, the millennial generation, don't really have any idea of what it's like. And I think
my pleasure. I want to thank you. Thank you, Vanessa.
No, always thank you. And I'll keep having you on. As you said, things are going to keep developing, and I don't think it's going to end or calm down anytime soon, particularly with the US and the UK and the EU banging the war drums as always, Heaven forbid they take a neutral position and actually try to broker any peace. No, they have to inflame it and increase
the truth.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Marwa, and God bless you, and take care of your beautiful family, and we'll speak again very soon.
Definitely, Habibti. Thank you very much.